Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together business owners, leaders and experts to talk about their business journeys and provide them with invaluable insights and explore the link between personal and business success. I am your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve. I have previously founded, grown and successfully exited 3 businesses in the business services and technology sectors. I have a passion for helping and advising businesses and seeing them succeed. We all know that leading and running a business comes with its own unique joys and challenges, and Evolve provides the advice, guidance and support to the business, you and your teams on that journey, be that if you're starting, growing or looking to exit or step away from your business. We do this through our Ignite, Thrive and Optimise programs and services, which include strategic advice, coaching and mentoring, leadership training, funded business support and so much more. If you want to learn more about Evolve, then please do go to evolveadvisory.co.uk or connect and message me on LinkedIn. For now though, let's just get on with the show. This week I'm talking to Jason Gault, CEO at TeamJobs as well as team manager at the Primera-TeamJobs cycling team. I've known Jason for a number of years and see him as a driven individual with a particular passion for leadership, teamwork and developing positive and successful mindsets. I therefore wanted to sit down with him to discuss his journey and what he's learned and continues to learn as both a successful business owner as a father and as a husband. Amongst the topics discussed, Jason talks about his changes he's seen in recruitment and his 22 years within the industry, what he learned about leadership and people during his 4 years as a Dorset Police Officer, the value of a business partner, especially when starting your very first business, the demands now of being a sole business owner, and how he balances time between TeamJobs and the cycling team. Jason also gives a very honest account on the effects his all-in approach to life has had on his personal life, as well as his mental health challenges he's faced and how he's overcome them. Please enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Jason, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Great to be here.
It's great to have you on the podcast. Going to talk about your life in recruitment, your sort of secondary role also as a team manager of a cycling team. So we'll talk all about that. But I suppose for our listeners, some of our listeners will already know you, some won't. So could you just tell our listeners a little bit about your business TeamJobs and where you are today, as it were?
Absolutely. So, I've been in recruitment for 25 years, had my own business for 22. And so 22 years TeamJobs. And that is a recruitment business based in Poole. We did in the early days have offices scattered over the south coast, but we've kind of centralised into one hub now, which is much more efficient for us as a business. And we're a player in the temporary, permanent, executive search market. We cover manufacturing, office-based businesses all over the UK. And we've also got an automotive recruitment business based in the UK, which covers the US automotive dealership recruitment. How it works from Poole, I'm still slightly bemused. It shouldn't really, but it does.
But and modern worlds, things like that too, don't they? Like you say, I mean, the world of recruitment has changed so much, hasn't it? And I'm sure we'll touch on that in the 25 years you've been in it.
It's much more competitive than when I started. Definitely. It's a different beast now than it was 20 years ago.
It's interesting. So I'm going to ask you directly a question about that. You're strong independent, quite a large independent, one of the 2 or 3 that exist in the Dorset market. Is there space for independent recruiters in this world now?
There is, and like there are always new independents setting up, and some of them are doing very well. But it's getting harder. There's more players. Businesses are much more savvy. They expect more.
Yeah.
In the early days, this will make you. I was a cheeky chappy going out, knocking on doors. I was good at what I did. I delivered with bells on. I always delivered. That was my USP. Would I get away with that style to the same extent now? Probably not. I'd have a degree. I'm sure I'd have a degree of success, but it was literally we used to be knocking doors on all the estates, and we built the business. Collaring people at the back of workplaces, just with a bag of donuts. People still do that. Our guys still do that, but it's a much smaller element.
Yeah.
And
so
you need
sort of lifted out of that.
You need a much higher what's the word I'm looking for? High level proposition to actually onboard the bigger, more savvy businesses now.
Yeah.
It's very different.
So do need to go back to your story, because I'm fascinated. We've known each other a number of years, and in researching for this podcast, I found out a fact I didn't know, was that between 95 and 99, 4 years, you were in the Dorset Police as a police officer. So how did you end up in the police, and then how did you transcend from that to a completely kind of polar opposite, really, into recruitment, Jason?
It's a funny story, really. So I was one of those kids, when everyone talks to school kids, they say, what do you want to do? Yeah. And some big kids know what they want to do, some don't. And sometimes kids who don't know what they do beat themselves up going, I don't know what. I didn't have the foggiest. So I left school, wasn't particularly academic. My dad went, you need to be doing engineering. And I went and did an engineering degree at Leeds Uni. Got in by the skin of my teeth because my A-levels weren't very good, and got a drinking man's degree, a 2-2, kind of got through it. I wrote 200 letters to try and get a job, didn't get one reply. So I came down to Poole purely because my dad had moved here. I got into fitness over the time I was at uni, and I actually became a fitness instructor at Poole Sports Centre. So my first job was when the Poole Sports Centre used to be there, which is now the Foundry or whatever in that building, or the rock climbing, I think it is now.
It's that end of the dolphin.
So for about 8 months I was the fitness instructor there, and I remember I was on $7,000 a year. Very quickly realised I was never going to have any bloody money. And then I think the penny finally dropped when I got promoted to duty manager, and they put my salary up to $7,500, and I was like, this isn't going to work. So I basically then applied for an engineering job, and I got a job down on Creekmore Industrial Estate working for Scott Closures, and I blagged a job as the manufacturing manager. I was it was way beyond my experience at the time, and did a couple of years there, and then I moved to Parker Digiplan, which is now BOFA, the BOFA building. So I became a team leader there. That was when I got my first taste of recruitment. This is all relevant to the police thing, trust me. So I became a client of Mark Nash, who at the time was Excel Resourcing.
Yeah, remember that.
And now Employ. And I'm obviously not trying to give you a plug, Mark, if you're listening, but so I was his client, and Mark and Gordon, who was Mark's business partner at the time, used to come and see me, and I probably had 20, 25 temps in at the time. So, they looked after me, and they were, and Mark, sorry to say, he was very good, and he was. But what inspired me at that moment was I was into cars. I was a young lad, no money. I had the world's crappiest car. I think I had a Ford Cortina estate at one point during that period. And Mark and Gordon turned up with brand new Rover 220 GTIs. Do you remember those?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So for me, as a lad working in a factory, I was like, Rover 220, having a 2 litre 30 years ago was a big deal. And I was like, and 16 valves, don't forget. Right? The kids nowadays won't have a clue what I'm talking about. And then a year later, I was still there. They turned up with brand new BMW M3s. Right. And I was just blew my brains. I was like, how can that happen? Yeah. At that point, I had no idea I wanted to go into recruitment. And I was bored. I was in engineering. It wasn't me. I'm a people person. I need to be engaging, doing stuff. I can't be closed into working in a cell environment or what have you. So I applied for Dorset Police on a whim. I didn't want to it wasn't that I wanted to be a policeman, it was just like,
Didn't want to be in engineering.
No, I didn't want to be in engineering, didn't want to be, it's just, I don't know, I didn't know what. I was like, let's try this. And then as I went through the selection, because it was quite hard to get into Dorset in those days, as I went through the selection process, I thought, I quite fancy this. And then I got in. And next thing, I'm up at training school and into the police. And I ended up at Boscombe, which was, I'll be honest with you, it's a fascinating place. Yeah. Absolutely. Because there is so much going on in Boscombe beneath the surface.
It is quite a great place, isn't it? There's quite a community there. It's changing all the time, isn't it?
It is. It's a really. I mean, you can see.
Back then,
Well, it was prostitution, it was drugs, petty burglaries, obviously funding the drugs, prostitution, generally funding the drugs. And yeah, so I was a street policeman out.
It's the baptism of fire.
Yeah, it was. And I'd never, I remember I'd never seen a dead body. I remember seeing my first dead body, making my first arrest, my first proper fight. There was all sorts of stuff, but I was really lucky. I was in a squad of like proper street policemen, and it was kind of what I would call almost the last era of what I call probably slightly old school police mentality, which isn't all bad, because that was one of my kind of learning lessons really, was you go to training school and they quite rightly kind of scare the crap out of you a little bit, that you've got to do things by and you do, you have to, but they kind of turn you into this cardboard cutout policeman,
robot type thing.
So you come out as this manufactured police, and then I walk into a squad with 25 year old school time stuff, and they're like, who's this probie, who's this, and you've got to, it's sink or swim. And next thing I'm on the street, and I remember making my first arrest, and I was very prescriptive, as they taught me. You're not relaxed, you're saying everything by the book, and the crooks, they're looking at you as if so. And I remember watching, the guys that've been doing it for years and years and years, and they were just themselves. They weren't trying to be a policeman. That was it. It was I call it authenticity, which is what I'll come back to in kind of my leadership. One of the big leadership lessons I learned. They didn't try to be anything other than they were. They obviously stuck to the rules as policemen, by the book, but they would talk to. Doesn't matter, some guy, whether it's a shoplifter, a burglar, a prostitute. I mean, we used to drive along, and where I'd almost think prostitution was a dirty word because you just never experienced it. We'd stop in the police car, we would chat, they would chat, they'd know their names, hello Deborah, you busy tonight? It would be, it was a proper, so the thing I learned in them was you treat everyone with respect, and what you got, ironically, from the crooks, as I know it sounds like a dick, but that's what we used to call them, you treat them with respect, even though they're in the wrong, they'd actually give you a little bit of respect back, and they know they're going to get nicked. And you'd go to the nick and they play ball, and it was just, it was one of my biggest lessons of don't try and be anything other than
just be authentic,
be real,
and treat people with respect.
And treat people with respect, 100%.
And you think you took that then into future life and still do?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I remember when I first got into recruitment. So basically, what happened was I did 4 years in the police. I nearly got stabbed with a syringe and a few other. I got involved in a few incidents. I got bitten on my arm, which was quite nasty, and I had to have HIV, hepatitis tests, and everything else. And that was an off-duty thing where I was down at Jazzy's, a couple of lads kicking off, and the manageress was being assaulted. And once you're a policeman, you know when you're off duty, you can't go, sorry, I'm off duty if someone really needs. Yeah. I had to get stuck in, and it ended up in a big old brawl, and I got this bite on my arm. And after I'd had all the AIDS test and everything else, and I'd had that incident with a syringe, I was working nights, days, Christmas Day. Yeah. You end up socialising with policemen because they're the only people that got time off the same time as you. And my money, I missed all the housing benefit and all that. So I was at that new generation of, and I just thought, it's not going to get me where I want to go. So I went back to Martin Ash.
Okay.
and said, have you got any engineering jobs? Because I thought I'll maybe go back into engineering. Yeah. And he said, you ever considered recruitment? I was like, no. So next thing, I'm in a 2-hour interview with Mark, and he was brutal, role playing, the whole 9 yards, and I just went with it. And he called me back for a second. We did it again. And he was like, fair play, and he offered me a job. So he offered me a job so obviously with my engineering background and my degree, he offered me a job as a technical recruiter.
Okay, which makes sense, doesn't it?
So I jumped in
into recruitment.
Yeah, and Excel resourcing at the time was it was a pretty brutal environment, great environment. You couldn't run a recruitment company like that now, really. It was. Mark's got a very direct style.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say that? Mark won't mind. He's I learned a lot. I learned loads from Mark. I'll say it now. I got loads to thank Mark for. There was no messing around. You were on it.
Yeah.
From the minute you arrived, there was no, you were on the beat of the bang. If something needed doing, it was done. And that was our USP. We were sharp. But the police bit, in that first 6 months, the funny thing was I was in my police mentality where, I was doing warrants in Boscombe, in the Crescent or something at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd be the doorman because I was into my bodybuilding then, and so I used to have, you remember the big door forcer? Yeah. So I was used to, being at some drug dealer's house at 4 in the morning, and they're all upstairs, and there'd be 7 or 8 of us in full riot gear, and we'd be like sneaking up because obviously it's all element of surprise. You've got to clear the house before anyone can flush anything down the toilet. Yeah. Literally, we just take the door off. These door forces are brilliant. You'd literally be bang, the door would literally fly off its hinges. And then you would just, we were all big blokes, full gear. These people, you imagine you're in bed asleep, and you literally cover every room. You run, and you're like, police, don't fucking move. Well, that's all right, I didn't mean to swear, but and your next thing you're in this drug dealer who thinks it's a bit hard, a bit of a hard boy, and he's jumping out of bed, he's starting, his wife's jumping, and it's like, and it's anyway. So I've kind of come from that mentality. You don't mess around. Yeah. And then I was in recruitment. I remember I'd be putting people into work, and sometimes they wouldn't turn up for work. I'd be like, you can't do that. So whereas now you kind of accept that's kind of what happens. Back in those days, I would get in my car and I'd drive around, because obviously you'd go at their addresses. I mean, you couldn't get away with it now in a million years. I'd drive around their house. And I remember being in cul-de-sac in the middle of a pool somewhere, throwing a stone up at a guy's window, because he's supposed to be started at a company in pool at 8 o'clock that morning or what have you. And he'd come to the window at like 20 past 8 because I'd gone to check him in and he wasn't there. And I'm like, mate, what were you doing? I said, get your clothes, and I'd literally get him out of his house in the car and drive him to work. And that was kind of so I kind of had this, so like when it came to doing sales, I didn't bat an eyelid. And I remember looking around my branch going, I see people that were kind of, they weren't selling kind of with conviction, or they kind of wouldn't. I used to love it when Mark would come in and go, right, power hour. I'll be like, game on, this is my time. Right. And that's how I created my worth. And that's kind of what I took forward when I started TeamJobs. Nothing fazed me. If someone said, that client's really hard to get into, that was the client I was going to get into.
That was the one you're going to.
It wasn't the one I would go, I won't bother ringing them, they're really hard. I'd be like, that's the one, I'll show everyone I can get in there. Okay. So I kind of saw it as a challenge.
It's interesting, isn't there? There's so many questions that come out of that little piece. I suppose one of them would be, is around that, if you were looking back now, you're talking, you've got daughters and you're talking to your daughters about finding their own path. Because, what advice would you give somebody? Because we don't all leave school with certainty of what we want to do or who we want to be, and probably less so now in this day and age than we did in our time, Jason. So, looking back on that journey, what has that taught you, and what advice would you give others?
I think be yourself is a huge thing. And I know that might sound like a really obvious, simple thing to say, but I see so many people who aren't true to who they are and don't embrace their personality. Or don't let their personality develop. And everyone's different. Everyone's got different strengths, weaknesses, what have you. And actually understanding who you are, embracing the good and the bad, and being you. So like with my kids, they're both totally different, but both incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Unique in their own way. And they've got, certain little things about them. I really try and, rather than me channel them into what I think they should be, I'm like, you've got something there, take it, run with it. And I try and encourage people to come out of their comfort zone. So what I find, again, I just take my daughters as an example. Like my eldest daughter, she'll shy away from things like PE and then sometimes when I can get her to do something, she'll go, I actually enjoyed that. So what I try and do is I don't try and force it. My dad I grew up in a military family, and my dad, he took it to the extreme where he was like, you will be, you will do this, you will do that, you will join the Navy when you're 16. I know it was, you won't wear jeans.
But that did then make you because life is some lessons to be learned, but you slipped up a couple of times in finding your true path as a result, didn't you?
Yeah. But what happened was when I went to boarding school from being at home, because I didn't have my dad having that huge control element over me. I did go off the rails. Now, luckily, I kind of found my way back on because I'd had enough time at home to have those values instilled in me.
The values were deep down.
But I could easily have gone the other way.
Yeah.
So I suppose what I'm trying to do with my kids is not be too much of a overbearing parent, but really encourage. But I don't like excuses. Yeah. I'm a bit old fashioned when, if she's like, I can't do something, or I don't want to do. I kind of shut that down, and I'm like, come on. And I think that's the thing is, you've got to take yourself out of your comfort zone to realise what you're good at.
Yeah, good. Great advice there, Jason. So you're at Excel Recruitment. What made you set up your own recruitment business? What was the spark that led to that?
So I really actually enjoyed it, Excel. I thought Mark was a good leader. He had a very distinct style, and there was some good people. There was some really good people there. They were definitely a maverick type of business. But it was
that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they were forging the local market. They were the player. There's no question. So I was in a good environment, but I realised after about 6 months I was already climbing quickly, and what I did, I was like a little sponge. So I just looked at, instead of being intimidated by the people that were good, my mantra was, if someone was really good at something, I'd try and be better at it than they were. So I would try and learn from the best and not gravitate to the sort of the average or so I started to, even within a year, I was controlling some good business. I'd won good business. I started overtaking people that had been in recruitment for, some of them 5, 10, 15 years. And I kind of thought, this is me. This is...
Okay, you had found your thing.
Yeah, it was my first commission-based job. I remember getting my first £1,000 commission check and going, Jesus, that's bonkers. I couldn't get my head around it. And I'd come from the police where... if I wanted to earn another £1,000, I was at the very least going to have to be a sergeant. I'd have to pass the exams, which would take me 2 years. I'd then maybe just have to shadow for 2 years. Then my face would have to fit. That might be a 5 or 6 year project. Yeah. Where now I'm going, I've done that in 8 months. And actually, if I can double it, I'll do £2,000. Yeah. And so I did that for a couple, I think I was there a couple of years. And then I got headhunted. So I got headhunted by a guy called Lloyd Murphy, who was at MPC. He was business partner with Clive Wood. Okay. And they'd obviously seen what I was doing, seeing I was, when you're in the crew, you get a feel for
whatever industry you're in, when your local market,
you get a feel for who the movers and shakers. Yeah. So they headhunted me, and they were quite a small company at the time. There was only about 5 or 6 of them. Clive was the MD. Clive wasn't a recruiter. Clive had come from engineering. He'd had years in engineering, but he'd had this opportunity through a mate he knew who'd basically set him up. So he was the MD and Lloyd was one of the directors. And I'd gone in and I couldn't believe how far behind they were from, how little business some of them had, just some of the way they just worked. So, when I'd come in, I'd be in early, I'd be bang, 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 and they'd be drifting in. And I remember in 6 months, I'd built up more business on my own than the whole of the rest of the business. So I'd literally, just from a standing start, because that was the big thing. A lot of my business came with me. And that was my first light bulb moment. I was like, my business has followed me. And I was like, and I'd built up almost a business in its own right, just on my own in 6 months. But I'd never run a business. I had no money. I mean, every penny, well, nothing's changed, Warren. Every penny I had, I spent. You're sitting there laughing, going, Chase, this penny really needs to drop for you. You're 51 years old, man. But I had no money. I'd never run a business. And for someone who's never had a business, there's almost this enigma of having a business. How do you have a business? Well, actually, really, it's not as hard as people realise if you just speak to the right people. But so Clive knew I wanted my own business, and we also, they exited Lloyd out of that business as well because he wasn't really performing. And I hope I'm not stitching anyone up with that sort of stuff. It's all true. Should have worked harder, Lloyd. And he had a friend called Anthony Hancock, who was a serial entrepreneur, multi-millionaire. So I think at the time I managed to put about 5, which was a huge amount of money. I managed to buy my flat, which actually just that little flat just down here, Golly Tops. You've seen the little, I got my first little flat. So I was in there, had a lodger, I was skint, no money, crap car. I'd put together this $5,000 was literally, so me and Clive literally put together a small amount of money and Anthony put in a bit more. But the first thing I learned was, at the time it was quite good to have people around me because I didn't really know what I was doing. But in reality, I probably didn't need, from a financial point of view, I actually didn't really need any business partners because in that first 6 months, we made money. Yeah. And not many businesses make money in their first 6 months. And I remember Alan Cobham Engineering up at Blandford. I had like 60 people in there. I had people out all over the place. And it was brilliant. It was a buzz. And we were just like this. The growth curve in the early days was massive. So when I look back, I go, I could have done it on my own. But we can all look back and say that.
It's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But
what I will say, though, is having a business partner is not always a bad thing because it's somebody who actually can share the burden, the worry, who can spot something you haven't spotted, can sometimes keep you on the straight and narrow, which might sound a bit odd to say as well. But I was young. Where would I have been if I had no business partners? I could have been way more successful. I could have been way less. It's impossible to call it. But we got involved and we were third, and off we went, and it just grew massively. And I was just probably overconfident. Nothing kind of got in my way in those days. So TeamJobs grew massively. We then set up the medical business. I headhunted an entire. Basically what happened was it was when Labour were in, and there was this massive drive for investment in the NHS, and we were like, we want a piece of that. And there was a medical agency in Bournemouth called, I can't remember what they were called. There was 4 girls there, and I managed to get hold of the manager. So I basically got hold of her, had a chat, and I headhunted the entire office. I mean, how I got away with it, I will never know, because we literally, that whole office gave their notice and came to work for us. The whole office started on the same day. But
recruitment has that ruthlessness about it.
Yeah, it was mad.
Or it did in those days, perhaps it doesn't now.
Well, legally, I'm not sure how we, I don't know how we did it really, because there's risk. There was a risk there, but we did it. I headhunted the entire office. And then that's it. We had a medical business, and then pre-2008, we kind of all measured ourselves by how many. It was funny. I remember Smart had X number of offices and Rubicon or what have you, and it was almost like, well, I've got 6 and now I've got 7 offices, and it was odd. Whether you make any money or not, it was kind of irrelevant. But it was. And I remember we went on this journey of opening up offices all over the place, and again, I think that's where probably went wrong for me a little bit, because I trust people too much. I've never had any formal management training, and I tried to manage a team in Chichester. So what I did, wherever we went, I would headhunt a team from scratch, pull them all in, and go, bosh, there you go. And of course, these people, you don't really know them. No, you think you're
not spending any time with them, because at that point you're spread yourself so
absolutely
thinly.
So I had this great team in Poole who I trusted, who kind of they just knew what was expected. So I didn't have to be like manager of the year, because they just knew. And I tried to manage my remote locations in the same way. And we had degrees of success, degrees of failure. And then after the 2008 crash, like all businesses, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I thought we were going to go bust at one point because our revenues just died. We got through it. We didn't go bust, didn't need any money, but we got through by the skin of our teeth. And then we basically said, we don't really. And then what happened was companies realised they could start remote recruiting, and and the market all started to change. And that's when we went, do you know what?
Consolidated back in.
Because we had leases all over the place and everything else. And it just, not for me. And I don't think it worked for my management style either. So that was the journey with Clive and Anthony. And then, crikey.
So eventually bought them out.
Yeah. So
how did that feel to go through that process?
Well, I still didn't feel like I'd really realised my potential as a leader. And I suppose I always had in the back of my mind, like from the early days, going, I could have done this rightly or wrongly, and I'm not trying to be,
done it differently.
but I could have. And I thought I got a third of the company, and I thought so. And Clive and Nancy were both 20 years older than me, and I knew Clive was probably going to want to retire at some point. So what I proposed at the time was, Clive, you take medical, I'll take recruitment. So essentially that's what we did. I gave up my shares in medical, and I kept my shares in recruitment. Anthony kept a third in each at that point. And it was daunting at the time, but I just felt it was right.
Yeah,
the right decision for me. Clive's now exited and retired. So read into that what you will. It was fine. And then about three years ago, I bought Anthony out of his final third. But at the same time, we've got pandemics and all the other stuff going on.
Else has gone on
and it's been a challenging few years. It's definitely I think that's the one thing as a sole owner. It's taken it out of me a bit. So I think that's the bit I've underestimated.
So actually, in hindsight, although you thought I could do it on your own, maybe some of the lesson is there was some intangible support about having others.
Well, I go back to that: a problem shared is a problem halved. Is that the expression? And there's a degree of truth in that. It doesn't mean anything's but if you've got someone who's as sort of liable as you are, and you're sharing the problem, but when I go home at night, I'm as a sole owner going, great, I own the whole company, that's great, but I also have all the risk, all the worry. If this goes wrong,
that's a very honest kind of response. And we've talked about, with the recruitment and your leadership there. I mean, but you've also built a successful racing team, road cycling team, and you're the team manager of that. I mean, how did that come about? And what lessons have you turned from business into sport? And what lessons are you taking now that you've learned from that competitive sport environment back into the business?
Sport has been a common thread for me since about the age of probably 16. So it's been something that has been a massive vehicle in helping me personally. I got into bodybuilding when I was about 16 and changed my life because I kind of suddenly realised I could be good on sports day, and I suddenly, as a youngster, created my worth, as we do in our own heads at that time in our lives. And because I was good at sport, I was one of the lads, and you feel so. But it kind of I built myself up, and that carried through. So I had this. Let me think. Probably a 30-year journey as a bodybuilder. I mean, I don't know if you knew me back then, Warren. I was up at 18 stone. I was a doorman when I first came down here because I'd got into it at uni, and it was the old way of thinking. Arnie was one of my was my mega. He still is my kind of hero, inspiration on many levels. And in those days, fitness was bigger the better. You used to carry your pots of rice and pasta and tuna around, and it was when clubbing was big and being a doorman was cool. And you look back now and go, what were we all, but that's where I was. And but what you probably, me, I go all in. So I was with my bodybuilding. I did a strongman competition 2 years running, but I never competed properly. But I was all in. I was a big lad. I took it seriously, and nothing kind of compromised my training. And I got to my late 30s. As a lot of guys did, we trained so heavy. And some of the old ways of training, you do inevitably cause injuries and damage, and I kind of just got to my late 30s. I thought I just thought I can't keep doing this. So I walked into Primera at the age of, I think, about 40, and I think I was 109 kilos at the time, and walked in with my suit on, and they were like, "Who the hell's this guy?" And me being me,
Hope he doesn't want a bike.
Yeah,
I ain't got one strong enough.
Well, I ended up buying a Pinarello Dogma, so I went straight in. It wasn't like I'll just buy a bike so I get on. I went straight in, walked out with a carb, and of course, and my wife was like, "You idiot." And like a load of my mates, they were like, "Jace, that's going to be in your shed, getting dusty in 3 months. What a waste of money." And I was crap. I mean, I was too heavy. I'd never done any CV my whole life. All I'd done is lift stuff. And I used to go out on the shop rides at Primera, and I'd be dropped literally within 5 minutes. I'm fired out of the back. But I never gave up. So I'd go back the next week. I'd last 8 minutes, and then I'd get to 15. We're talking of an hour and a half, 2 hour ride here. So I was literally, they'd be like, "What happened to Jason?" Hardly seen me. But I lost a stone within 2 or 3 months. I'd lost a stone. I was like, Jesus. And from someone who'd been chasing being big my whole life, that was a real. So I went with it, and I spent that winter. I lost a couple of stone. I started getting stronger and stronger on the bike, and I thought, I can do this. Okay. So I then went, and then what happened was, the turning point was, you've heard of Morton, the local kind of crit race, and it was a big thing. It was way bigger back then than it was now, and people knew I was getting a bit stronger on the bike and said, "Jace, you should do a race for a laugh." So I went and did Morton, and I won it. First time I ever did a race, I won. And everyone was like, "This is ridiculous." I remember Eamon Dean, who's a big local cyclist, interviewing me afterwards, going, I remember him looking at my build and my shape, going, "You shouldn't be riding a bike." And then I got a coach, and I then went, that was it. I was all in, and I was training twice a day. I went down to about 83 kilos, which is still heavy in racing terms, but it's really light for me. And I won multiple times at Morton. I won a number of races. Then I got invited onto the Primera race team at the time, which was probably only 4 lads. And it wasn't a really serious, it was kind of just a bit of a hobby thing for the shop. And then after the year, Bill said, "Do you want to be a sponsor? Do you want to?" So I was like, "Yeah, let's see if we can do something with this, turn it into something." And so we've kind of been on that journey for, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years. So me and Bill have kind of been partners in it. And we've built it now to the level where it's a 16-man squad. We're elite, UK top 20. This year, we're still pinching ourselves. We're sponsored by Pinarello, Muck-Off, Norco, Symes, Bassini is doing all our socks, Velo Forte doing all our food. We've got, it's just bonkers for a team of our level to get that level. I mean, the bike sponsorship is massive. Yeah. Because even teams of our level looking in going, they're treating you like a pro team, which they are. We've got, I don't know if you saw on social, but a couple of weeks ago, we literally 8 brand new Dogma Fs. It's like nearly 100 grand's worth of bikes they've brought down, completely custom built at the Pinarello factory up in near London, all delivered, and it's amazing. But how do you balance your time between a kind of commercial business and a business? Because it is a business at that size. It is a sacrifice, and it's something you've got to be. And I'll be honest, and I don't like admitting this. In the early days, the family did suffer a bit. Okay. So that was if I look back to Beebs when she was young, there were times I put my training over spending time with her, and I regret that. And I've corrected that now, sort of being a bit older, a bit wiser. Yeah. It definitely impacts the business because you to compete really at the level. Even the level I know, for me, it's 15 hours a week on the bike, which is huge when you've got a business and you've got family. So to make it work for me, I do have to nick some time during the week. Yeah. But I suppose that's the time I go for the leaders I'm bringing up in the business. That's their time to shine. You shouldn't need me there every day. If you want to be a leader and be a director in the business, you need to better do what I did or do it better than me. Ideally,
it's that balance between giving people their head there and being present, and showing them and mentoring them and coaching
Correct.
them, isn't it?
And it is a challenge.
It's a difficult balance to get in a business, isn't it?
And I don't always get it right, Warren. And I'll be the first to hold my hands up. I think I'm getting it. I'm getting it right more now than I was.
Yeah.
But it is a sacrifice because it's a huge commitment. I mean, some of the lads in the team are doing 20 to 25 hour weeks. They're 20. They got no girlfriends.
I suppose, but their aspiration is where can they?
Some of them want to be pro. You know, I've got an 18-year-old he's amazing. You know, and he's taken a year out. His dad's gone all in, van, this, that. He's literally full-time cyclist now. Yeah. Totally supportive. I'm just going to see. And I'm an old git trying to keep up with them, and it's bloody hard. Yeah.
What I'm intrigued about is I've got two questions around this, but the first is you're clearly, and everybody that knows you would probably reflect this, but anybody even listening to this short conversation would say there's clearly somebody here that's got an obsessive personality who is clearly very driven, and you've used the phrase is always all in. So my first question is, do you think that's always served you well?
No. I think it's been a good thing on the whole because it's helped me achieve in areas, but what it's done is I'm so all in on when I find something, particularly something new, where I go, right, this has got to work, or I'm gonna, whether it be the cycling or whatever it was, I'm so uncompromising in my approach to it that then almost everything else is secondary. So if I look back, those first few years when I started to get coached, and I was then at that point going, how far can I take my cycling? I mean, I'm now well beyond that. There would be times I'd absolutely put cycling above the business. I'd hate to admit that. Yeah. But it's me being honest. Yeah. Not to the detriment, but I go, do you know what, if I'd given more time to the business, where could that have been in the same time frame, as an example? Impossible to say. Yeah. But it was something. It's hard to. But it's something rightly or wrongly, it's just kind of it's kind of something in here which drives me along.
Yeah, and it has, on the whole, served you well to get you to where you are, isn't it? It was just a reflection point. And I suppose the other question is when you've got, and a lot of owner managers, business owners, founders, all feel this. They are very obsessive, driven, and all in. But in your case, you probably have taken it to a certain extent to a different level. How does that impact your team and your expectations of the team? Does that lead to challenges, or have you learned over the years to reflect and not expect?
There were times when I look back and when you kind of expect. So some of the mistakes I made as a leader, I kind of expect everyone to do things the way I did them. What I've learned is people are different, and actually letting people blossom in their own right is I've actually gotten far more out of people. There were times looking back, I had a couple of people in the business, I won't say who, what, where, when, good people, but recruitment, you get big personalities. It's that type of industry. If you know people in recruitment who are successful there, you have to be a big personality. And I had some huge personalities in my business, and there were a couple of times when I confused people challenging me or having an opinion or pushing back on me. And I'm not saying they were always in the right or wrong, but sometimes there were times when I'd confuse that with me. I'd almost go on the attack rather than maybe listen and work a way around it and be the bigger person. And so I can think of at least two people who aren't in my business anymore, who have actually done extremely well and would probably go, best thing I ever did, because, I've actually done extremely well, and they have done, and they're great people. But if I look back and look at my decision process leading to them leaving, I'd go, I needed to be the bigger person, and I made some mistakes, and I got the situations a little bit.
Expectation of yourself reflected on others.
Yeah. I think I struggled to take criticism in the early days. I saw that as a weakness.
Yeah.
I think I thought as a leader in the early days, you had to have all the answers. That was kind of, I think, my mentality. And my mentality in the early days was, my leadership style was very much just try and keep up with me.
Yeah.
You know, you hold on to my coattails. It's all about me a little bit, you know. And I was the face of the business and now I've come and it's about them. It's all about them.
It's interesting, 180 degree turn.
And I feel so differently. You know, and there's people, there's a couple of people that exit the business. I'd apologise to them because I go, do you know what, I didn't get it right.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
No. But then when we're younger, we've got that hunger, that sense of desire inside of us. We haven't, life lessons haven't been dealt on us yet.
No.
We just do what our natural instincts show, and perhaps with the background, the military, that hunger that was instilled in you, desire to prove yourself, you had to do it that way to begin with.
Yeah, and the other thing, which again, not the easiest thing to talk about, but talking of business owners going all in, putting pressure on yourself, and there may be someone listening this who may. Sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. So I'll tell you what happened to me. I've always been very lucky. I've always been very fit. I've always been. I was having a degree of success in business. I was competing in sport. Family was, I was like, it's all going. But what I did, I was trying to go all in on everything.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah, you can't have all the taps.
And at the same time, I was competing in my cycling. I was coaching, putting ridiculous hours in. I was trying to keep the business going, trying to keep my wife happy, the family happy, spend enough time with them, buying out my, as I was saying earlier, buying out the business partners, restructuring, all this sort of stuff. I was trying to do some work on the house, and I fell into that trap of being, I'm invincible. I can do everything, right? And my cup, I filled it so full. I never understood this until it happened. I then started suffering with anxiety, and I hit the wall probably about 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I was like, shit, and it was awful because for the first time in my life I'd gone, but you're Jason Gault. Yeah, you're invincible.
You're not
you can't. I'm not vulnerable. And I was suddenly like, shit. This is, I then was like, what? I felt I was in a bit of a hole. I realised I just completely overcooked it, and it took me a couple of years to do a massive reset.
And because thank you for sharing that. That is a really important message and story to share with those listening, because we all can get ourselves to that point from mental health and anxiety. We can push ourselves too hard, and it's when people share that people kind of listen and think they may be there themselves. But the important follow-on from that, Jason, for me, is what did you do? You talk about a 2-year reset. What was the moment of realisation, I'm going to do something about this, and what were the very first steps? Because somebody listening to this, that could be great advice for them.
The first thing was something's got to give. So that was the first thing. I realised I can't do everything I'm doing. The only mistake I did get through it on my own. I wish I'd actually been big enough to maybe take some advice, get a little bit of help, because I didn't. I kind of thought, I can do this. Again, going back to us, probably the reason I got into this. But what I did do is I stopped competing on my bike. I still, rather than trying to be the best on my bike, I just rode my bike.
Yeah.
And actually enjoyed it and rode it. If I didn't have time to ride it, I didn't ride it. And if I did have time, I did. And I didn't just go and ride it with my mates and enjoy it. So I dropped my coach, because every day I'm looking at my training peaks going, Christ, I've got to do 2 hours with 5 intervals of this, that power. And that's when I'm going, and when I'm going to fit that meeting in, so I just binned that all off. So
prioritisation.
I thought, I've got to get the positive energy I still had at that point has got to go into the business.
Yeah.
So I then had to go, right, come on, Jace, let's get this show back on the road, and I had to look after myself. I did less. I tried to take as much pressure off myself as I could. But it took time. That's the one other thing I learned massively in my brain. I thought, a couple of weeks, I'll be all right. I'll snap out of this. It doesn't work like that. Months and months and months, relapses. You realise there's a couple of things that trigger you. I had to come off caffeine because caffeine was a bit of a trigger for me at the time. And I'm like with coffee. Coffee is like religion for me. And it's really interesting. I think as men, particularly, we do this. We're shit at talking about stuff.
Talk about it, do we?
And we don't. And we're a bit proud, and we all want to be perceived as being successful. And I can sit here and go, team jobs, blah, blah, blah. We've had some challenges. Yeah. We've learned some lessons, but I've got great people, and we're moving forward. That's what business is all about.
Brilliant. That's a great piece to end this conversation on. But before we go, I always ask, I'm intrigued to know your answer given that last piece, but the whole conversation is, what's your definition of personal success, not business success, personal success, Jason?
Being content, realising what you do have in your life that is going well for you. I think we live in a lovely area here. It's very easy to fall into the trap of not releasing all the things that you do have. The grass is greener, whether it be in your relationship or whether your house isn't big enough, your car's not fast enough. Actually looking at your life and going, look at everything I actually have got that's going well. My children, my wife, the time we spend together, the people in my business. I'd love my business to be 3 times the size that it is, but I've got a great business. I should be really happy that I've achieved all. And I think that was a massive learning point for me. I was always after the bigger, better deal.
I was going to say, being content, that's a great way to define success. But if I had asked the Jason Gault of that same question 5 years ago, what response would I have got?
Money,
cars,
more cars, bigger house,
possessions,
money, loads of money in the bank. And don't get me wrong, I'd still love that, but my perception has changed and I see some people that have got. I know a lot of people with a lot more money than me, and I look at them and they go, they're not content, they're not happy, and I look at it and go, that's where I absolutely do not want to be. So, contentment and being authentic, I think, is my other massive thing, as in being real, not trying to be anything that you're not.
No. Perfect. Jason, if people want to learn more about you, or importantly, learn a bit more about Team Jobs, where can they go?
So the website is teamjobs.co.uk. We've got a lovely new office over on the on the Nuffield Fleetsbridge. Christ, I don't even know where my office is. A Nuffield Industrial Estate. We've taken a suite on the ground floor there near the Travel Lodge. Fantastic, and the team are very happy. And we've got, like I say, I now make great coffee. So come in, I promise you, with the best coffee in Dorset, guaranteed. Hold me to it. Brilliant.
Jason, I've loved having you on the podcast. Thank you for being so candid and open and honest, and for sharing, particularly towards the end of our conversation, so openly.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Warren.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed and inspired individual and business leader. And don't forget, if you'd like to learn more about Evolve and the services we offer and how we can help you and your business confidently start, grow and exit, then please go to evolveadvisory.co.uk. Please also help and support this podcast by subscribing, liking and giving us a positive review on your favourite listening platform. Thanks for listening and see you next week.